Chapter 4, Police Strategies, Part 5. Our last lecture is on broken windows policing. Now, if some of you have taken a bunch of other CRIM classes already, you may tell me, as some of my on-campus students do, that we've heard everything we need to know about broken windows policing. And then when I deliver this particular lecture in class, like I'm delivering it to you now, they soon find out they really didn't understand broken windows policing. So if you do know it pretty well, bear with me. If you don't, well, broken windows policing, it was an important development. Broken windows policing was created by James Q. Wilson and George Kelling. They were both Harvard researchers. James Q. Wilson was the more famous of the two. He was known as a pretty famous criminologist. George Kelling was more the police expert. But Wilson and Kelling were involved in a foot patrol study in New Jersey. And as part of the study, this was back in the 70s, they were getting some weird information back, some weird feedback, because as part of the study they asked the community, what are some of the priorities that you have? What should the police be doing? And so these were communities that had serious crime problems, lots of murders, lots of rapes, robberies, armed robberies, those kinds of things. So that's what they were expecting the community to respond with. We really want you to do something about those serious crimes. But that's not what the community said. The community, in their surveys, many of them said, well, we want you to do something about the garbage that's lying in the street. That's not even a criminal problem. We want you to do something about the abandoned houses. We want you to do something about the prostitutes who are turning tricks on the street. Now remember, there are lots of murders going on, so do we really care that much about a few prostitutes turning tricks? We want you to do something about the drug addicts who are leaving their needles in the park, those things. And so Wilson and Kelling could have just dismissed it and said the public's crazy, but instead they really thought more and more about why was the public really concerned about these offenses. And they came up with some ideas that led them to broken windows policing. And so they really identified these responses, these lower, that the public was giving about these lower level crimes. They said the public is really talking about what Wilson and Kelling called quality of life crimes or offenses. So these weren't so much the real serious crimes, but they really said something about the quality of life in a neighborhood. If you're living in a neighborhood where the city never picks up the garbage, you've got abandoned buildings that should be torn down, the city does nothing about it. If the police officers drive right by the prostitutes out in the streets and the drug users who are shooting up, you're probably not living in a great neighborhood. And what's more, the people in the community were looking at all of these seemingly minor problems and saying, if the police can't do anything about them, can they really do anything about the more serious problems? And so Wilson and Kelling started thinking, these are important offenses. They're not the murders, they're not the rapes, but they're extremely important because they really wear down a community. It's kind of like a toothache. A toothache, maybe it doesn't have, the real sharp pain of a punch in the face, but it wears you out more than a punch in the face because it's constantly making you feel miserable. And that's kind of what these Wilson and Kelling thought these quality of life offenses were doing to communities. And so they believed that they eventually developed their theory, and the very basis of broken windows policing, and this is important to remember, is that disorder, so these quality of life offenses, actually causes more serious crime. So disorder causes crime is the relationship that's at the base of broken windows policing. Let me stress that again. Disorder causes crime. What their belief is if the police ignore these lower level crimes, then you're going to have more serious criminals who are looking around the city to try to figure out, where am I going to do my crime? Are they going to pick the community that really cares about itself, that really takes care of its neighborhood? Or are they going to go to the community where chaos seems to rule, where it seems like nobody's in charge? Well, it's a no-brainer. Wilson and Kelling said they're going to go to the more serious, or they're going to go to the area where the chaos is. So what starts out as these minor quality of life offenses, a little drug use on the streets, some prostitution, some really aggressive beggars who are demanding money. What starts out with that really leads to more serious criminals coming into the neighborhood. Because if the lower level bottom feeders, so to speak, can get away with it, then the sharks and the whales can come in and commit their offenses as well. And probably nobody's going to do anything because everybody's behind their locked doors. They don't know their neighbors. They don't care about their community. And the police aren't doing much about it either. So what Wilson and Kelling did was they wrote their article about broken windows policing in 1982, and they said this whole notion, what's happening in these communities is it can be analogized to a vacant house where a window is broken. So let's assume that you have a house that appears to be vacant, and somebody comes by and somebody throws a rock through a window, and they break the window. So really there are two responses that can occur. One is somebody comes and fixes the window. That doesn't mean they have to put in a brand new window pane and put a 24-hour guard in front of the house. But they at least did something about it. It showed that somebody is watching this house, somebody still cares about it. So maybe they put a piece of cardboard in the window to at least keep some of the rain out and some of the other weather. Or the second thing that could happen is nobody does anything. They don't fix the window, they don't seem to even notice it, nobody cares. Well, if this happens, if nobody cares, then chances are somebody else is going to come along at some later point. They're going to see that there's a window broken out and nobody's done anything about it, and the person who broke the window didn't have anything happen to them. That other person, or maybe it's even the first person again, is going to throw another rock through another window. And this is going to continue to happen as long as nobody does anything about the house. As long as it appears that you could throw rocks through the window and nothing's going to happen to you, people who would normally have not thrown rocks might decide, I'm going to throw a rock. I'm going to break a window. And pretty soon what happens is all the windows are broken out. So now more serious vandalism occurs. The house is, being exposed to all the elements, so nature is taking its toll on the house. It's starting to look more run down. But you have even more serious vandals who are not content with just throwing rocks. So now maybe they're smashing down the door and going inside and busting up the place inside. Maybe somebody comes in and sets fire to the house and burns it down. So this house that perhaps could have been saved if somebody had just responded earlier, if somebody had just taken care of that one little broken window, has now completely fallen down. It is past what Wilson and Kelling called the tipping point. You can't save it. It's gone. And so these more serious acts happened as a consequence of that earlier one. So again, disorder causes crime. So this broken window was disorder. It was the quality of life offenses that Wilson and Kelling talked about, and it led to more serious crime, the more serious vandalism. So Wilson and Kelling said, we need to go in, we need to have somebody who, and namely the police, show that we do care about these communities. So police, you've been driving right by those prostitutes. You've been doing nothing about the garbage in the street because you said, that's not my problem. That's the garbage city's sanitation department or garbage department. That's their job. Well, no, it's your job, Wilson and Kelling said. You need to show that somebody's in control. So get on the phone and call the mayor up and tell the mayor to put a lot of pressure on the sanitation department to go and clean up the garbage. Get on the phone and call the building inspectors and have them condemn the dilapidated buildings so that the crack houses don't stand anymore. Have them enforce the building codes against the absentee landlords, the slumlords, who have buildings that they're renting out that have no heat, that have no working water, whatever it might be. So again, these may not seem like they're criminal problems, but show that you care. Do something about those prostitutes on the street. Do something about the junkies who are shooting up. Do something about the beggars who are coming up and demanding money from people. So address the disorder. Don't ignore it. And this is the heart of broken windows. If you stop the disorder, the belief is you'll stop the more serious crime. Because then you'll stop the community from hitting the tipping point and moving past it, where you're not going to save it. So broken windows policing, by Wilson and Kelling's own admission, is a form essentially of problem-oriented policing. It's a very specialized form, and it's saying, we think the root cause of the more serious crime is this disorder. So the way to deal with the disorder is to send the police out there and actually have them respond and do something about the disorder. Don't just drive by it. Show the community that there is someone who is lawful authority, who's in charge of this community, who cares about it. So police should deal seriously with quality of life offenses, and Wilson and Kelling suggested they should employ order maintenance policing. Remember that order maintenance policing is keeping the peace. So police officers, don't think of yourselves solely as crime fighters and that you're only interested in solving the serious crimes. Get out there and enforce the disorder that's happening on the streets. Go out there and make sure that it's under control. Do order maintenance policing. Go back and do that old style policing. What will happen as a result, Wilson and Kelling surmised? You're going to win the trust of the public. You're going to deter more serious criminals. So those are two valuable things. Does it actually work? Well, the real problem is the basic premise for broken windows policing is disorder causes crime, and criminologists doubt that that's really true. There may be some truth to it, there may not. So if disorder doesn't cause crime, then what is the relationship between crime and disorder? Maybe it's that crime causes disorder. Maybe, unlike Wilson and Kelling thought, it's not that the little criminals, because they can get away with it, are bringing the big criminals in. It may be the other way around. If murderers and rapists and armed robbers can get away with what they're doing, then it's probably a pretty safe bet that a prostitute can get away with what she's doing. And so maybe crime causes disorder. Or maybe crime and disorder are symptoms of another factor. Maybe it's poverty and discrimination and other things that's causing both crime and disorder. And it's not that crime is causing disorder. So there's a problem with broken windows in that we're not sure that disorder actually causes crime. That if you stop disorder, you're going to reduce serious crime. Research so far doesn't support the conclusion that broken windows does actually reduce serious crime. So should we abandon it? Not necessarily, because remember, go back to the whole reason that Wilson and Kelling came up with this idea was because the public was saying, we're concerned about these things. We're concerned about quality of life offenses. So even if you're not stopping the more serious crimes, it may be important to still deal with the quality of life offenses, because that's what the public is really concerned about. Show that you hear them. Show that you feel their pain, so to speak, and help them. You may get more respect back from the police if you're actually responding to these particular offenses, regardless of whether it reduces down more serious crime or not. Finally, broken windows policing was most famously implemented in New York in the 1990s. Rudy Giuliani, we've been hearing a lot about him, and William Bratton, New York City Police Commissioner at the time, both came into office in the 1990s, and they had very much an idea of lowering New York City's crime rate. And so Bratton had studied at Harvard. He was formerly the Boston police chief and had gotten his graduate degree at Harvard and studied with Wilson and Kelling. So he implemented what was known as zero tolerance broken windows policing. What was meant by this was officers were expected to respond to all quality of life offenses. They didn't have to arrest everybody, but they weren't supposed to drive by any of them if at all possible. So if you see somebody taking a sip out of a beer and it's a violation of the New York open container law, that normally they wouldn't have cared about it. Even if this is a person who's causing no other problems, they're sitting on their front step but having a beer on their front step, police officers, you need to get at least respond to it and to ask them to take it inside. You don't have to give them a ticket, but take it inside. So it was zero tolerance. Crime seemed to go down right away as soon as they implemented this, and everybody said, you found the secret. Well, 25 years of hindsight shows crime was going down everywhere. We don't know how much was attributable to broken windows policing. It would have probably gone down regardless of what they had done. What did happen was some neighborhoods really liked zero tolerance policing, while others felt that it was repressive. That they said, look, we can't even have a beer on our front step. Every time we move, we're viewed as a suspect. And so even though Times Square was really cleaned up as a result of zero tolerance policing, it didn't work well on everyone. Different neighborhoods felt that some disorder should have been allowed. There's a difference between the drunk who's falling down on the streets and bothering people and having an open container, and the person who's a law-abiding citizen who just worked a hard day and it's a hot July afternoon, and they're having a beer on their front step. So we want tolerance some places. We want some disorder. We don't want to eliminate it completely. So zero tolerance policing was found to sometimes create more problems, more complaints against the police, more problems with relationships in some communities where relations were already strained. So in neighborhoods where there was already a bad relationship between the police and the community, zero tolerance policing tended to make it worse. Often they were clogging the courts because they were arresting people for minor offenses. The police often viewed this as a blank check to really, take off the gloves and do whatever they wanted. So again, there were more complaints against the police. There are also more people now with criminal records that wouldn't have had it otherwise for these relatively minor offenses, which meant they had harder times getting jobs, which caused more problems in the community. So there were a lot of problems with zero tolerance policing. The bottom line is we might want to do broken windows policing, but we might want to have an appropriate level of tolerance. Know your neighborhood. Know how much disorder they're willing to tolerate. On a Penn State football Saturday, we want a lot of disorder. We want the crowd to be wild. We want them to be screaming when Penn State sacks the other team's quarterback. We don't want them to clap their hands real politely like they're at an opera. On the other hand, when the opera is playing at Eisenhower Auditorium on campus, we don't want people shouting like they're at the football game. So there are different levels of disorder that are tolerated, and the police need to have an understanding of what should be tolerated, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable to the public, and then they can address broken windows accordingly.